race fans, my name is Taylor and welcome to Above the Yellow Line, the show where we talk about all the updates, theories, news, recaps, and more of the NASCAR Cup Series. This is an opinionated episode, so buckle yourselves in for some updates and hot takes before we get into the main event, the Drydene 400 at Dover International Speedway, the Monster Mile. I'm so excited to get to that track this weekend. Lots of drivers to talk about, lots of race-winning picks to discuss and kind of think through. But before we get that, we gotta do our updates and hot takes. So let's start with a look back at last weekend's race. As always here on Above the Yellow Line, we're going to go back to last race weekend at Darlington, the Goodyear 400, and discuss TV viewership and how fans really like this race. We're going to talk about Jeff Gluck's race poll here. 72.4% of those who participated on the Jeff Gluck Racing poll on Twitter said that this was a good race. In this list of stats, this race ranks 6 out of 8 on the poll list. And more good news from FS1, this race had a rating of 1.71 and had 3.019 million viewers. For a Mother's Day weekend, again, I'm shocked because I would expect people to kind of be with their families, being out. I mean, of course, I was hanging out with my family, but I was able to still catch the race on time. I had to catch up a little bit. But for a holiday race weekend, that is a really good rating, and it was the best rated race on FS1 since 2017. So impressive stats there for this weekend's viewership. I think Darlington Throwback Weekend also helps bring in views because every fan wants to see their favorite driver's throwback paint scheme. Overall, all over the board, a great weekend for Darlington, the Goodyear 400, and for NASCAR. So that was all the news from last week. Let's step into this week now with big news that was released on Thursday. Texas Motor Speedway President Eddie Gossage, the only president at Texas Motor Speedway to date, announced that he is stepping down after the All-Star race. That is a lot to unpack. I'm not going to lie, that is a lot of news to unpack. So let's start by talking about what this means for the sport. First, I want to mention is that Eddie has been a powerhouse in the sport. His time that he has spent promoting the sport is second to none. He's so good with the fans. He's really good with the media. A lot of the media members actually posted saying they don't know what's going to happen now because he was such a big part of their careers, a big part of just being their friend. So he's definitely a personality in the sport that we are going to miss. He brought a lot of bold ideas to the table, and I don't know who's going to fill his shoes, and nobody really can. He has had such an impact on NASCAR as a whole, so he will be missed in the president position there. Also, something to mention, a lot of people see this as a negative thing, and it is a really sad thing, but a lot of people are actually also seeing this as a positive, and here is why. I hate to say it, but it's no secret that fans have not liked the racing at Texas Motor Speedway in recent years. They added the PJ1, that divided fans. I almost see it as an equivalent to what happened at Kentucky Speedway, where they added the PJ1, the racing just kind of went down, and now it's off the schedule. So with Gossage stepping down, that leaves a lot of questions to be answered. I kept mentioning, who's going to fill his shoes? And if they do, can they bring the racing back to life? With him stepping down, does this also mean that NASCAR is looking to eliminate Texas Motor Speedway completely off their schedule for next season? Or are they looking to eliminate one of the two races on the Texas Motor Speedway schedule? We don't know yet. NASCAR just started looking at the 2022 schedule. There's a lot of additions they're wanting to make, a lot of things they're wanting to tweak, a lot of things I think they should tweak personally, but that's yet to be determined. We'll talk about a little bit of that in a second of what they're wanting to add, but lots of unknowns about Texas Motor Speedway and their future as of right now. We just don't know. So a lot of things we don't know about Texas Motor Speedway, but a few things we do know. Moving on to a positive piece of news here. Texas Motor Speedway for their All-Star race, Kansas Speedway, Daytona International Speedway, and Darlington Raceway are opening their stands to full capacity for fans for their summer and fall races. I mentioned last podcast how incredibly amazing it was to hear fans in the stands, whether they were booing, whether they were cheering. It was just nice to have enthusiasm, and I think that really helps the drivers, especially post-race. It's nice to just not have dead air anymore. I know we've had stands at half capacity, and that's really cool. I really appreciate that, but having stands open back up for me is such a positive. It gets people back in the sport. It gets sponsors back in the sport too. Just amps up the excitement again for NASCAR as a whole. I mentioned last podcast how incredibly amazing it was to hear fans in the stands, whether they were booing, whether they were cheering. It was just nice to have enthusiasm, and I think that really helps the drivers, especially post-race. It's nice to just not have dead air anymore. I know we've had stands at half capacity, and that's really cool. I really appreciate that, but having stands open back up for me is such a positive. It gets people back in the sport. It gets sponsors back in the sport too. Just amps up the excitement again for NASCAR as a whole. So that's the news there. We're opening up the infield. We're opening up the stands. We're also going to talk about here a little bit of controversy, a little bit of opinion. We're opening up some old tracks. So here we're going to have a talk here. If you're not up to date on the Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway stuff, I would look it up. I'm going to update you the best I can here, but this is a saga. There's probably some things I'm missing, but this is about the recent debates on whether we should open this track back up or not, and the crew, the the entire community, I would say, not being on board for this. And there's a lot to discuss because I want to talk about the community side of things, and I want to talk about the NASCAR fan base side of things because we're not gelling. There's things that we don't understand about the community. There's things the community doesn't understand about NASCAR. And I want to bring those forward so as fans, we can understand where these community members might be running into problems. This is not to degrade the community members. This is not to put anyone down. This is so we can understand what's actually happening and where people are probably getting kind of snagged up. After that, I'm going to talk about more of an exciting piece of news with the North Wilkesboro Speedway, but for now, let's start with the drama piece of things and we'll get into the exciting news that I think has some really good potential of happening. A while back, NASCAR announced that they had talks about renovating the Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway that hasn't had a race since 1984. Speedway Motorsports, with the help of Bristol Motorsports, is trying to make a contract or a deal with the community of the Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway to put racing back in the system, but it has to be approved by the fair commissioners and the Metropolitan Council boards. Like I said, we're running into problems here. Up on your screen is details of the deal so far, and I say details, but there's not a lot of information about this just yet. There's general ideas. We have an agreement with the city for 10 years, 4 5-year renewal options totaling 30 years lease. We also have a curfew up. We have an idea I'm mentioning of sound, how it can be managed with walls being put up. We have a new tunnel under turn 3 and new grandstands. So those are ideas that they are presenting and some details that they've talked about. And this deal could range anywhere from $61 million to $95 million. So a lot of money is being poured into this idea, and there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of things that the community members don't know, NASCAR doesn't know. So I don't know if it was presented at the wrong time with not enough information, but that's part of the problem, I think, to start with. Lots of ideas, but nothing concrete yet. Problem number one, I think community members are running into is if they want to make an argument to say we do not want this track in our hometown, which I'm going to get to that in a second too, is they need to inform themselves about the sport, what actually happens, what they do. Another thing they need to inform themselves about is how much NASCAR will actually be at the track. Now, if you look at a race that happens at a speedway twice a year, there's usually, if we bring all of the series in, that's 3 races per race weekend. So that's 6 races total at the track in 1 year. It's not an everyday thing. The track isn't going to be used every single day. So that's problem number 1. Issue number 2, I think these community members are having is noise. Now, I live about 10-ish minutes away from a racetrack. So yes, there is noise. I can hear it from my house. It doesn't shake my house. It doesn't, do any of those crazy things, but it can be a little bit of a disturbance. So I do understand that if you're coming home from maybe work, or of course the races would be held on a weekend, but if you're wanting to have a relaxing weekend and there's noise, yeah, that could be a little bit of a disturbance. I do understand that. It can, plain and simple. I get that. So those are a few arguments I see very valid for the community members, and I want to bring those to light to the NASCAR community because I'm going to flip the tables here and say what I think the NASCAR community can do to understand this perspective and to understand why this is such a big deal and why there's so much backlash on this speedway being brought back to the community. What NASCAR fans need to realize is the reality that this has for these people. These people moved to this track or moved to this area when the track was dead. They moved here not expecting the track to be revived. It was a viable opportunity. It was a real estate thing. It was a way to build a community, and they did that. Now NASCAR's moving in, and I equate this to almost being like you buy a Victorian house built 100 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever, and then the family member who built that house, lived in that house previously, knocks on your door and says, hey, we love this house. I remember living in it. We're going to move back into your garage. You don't have a say. Nice to meet you, neighbor. I mean, that's kind of how I see this happening here. And I know it's a weird analogy, but that's how I make sense of it. Honestly, it's kind of like we're invading their space. And I understand if you're a race fan, you're like, I would love to have a racetrack in my backyard. I really would. But these people, they're maybe not race fans, and they wouldn't like that. This is an invasion of their home and their community that they've built. They cannot just pack up and move. And no, like, I want to bring this home. They didn't know that they were going to be rebuilding the racetrack. So yes, I think us in the NASCAR community need to realize it does kind of impact their way of life. It's a reality that we as NASCAR fans have to understand. So again, I've condensed my thoughts. This is an argument that I know is going to keep happening. I know the community members are burnt out. The NASCAR media side's burnt out. Us as fans are burnt out on this. So I'm only going to mention this again when more news comes out, more concrete things. But I had to bring this topic up again because it was just so over social media. I could not ignore it. So to close this out, I have some suggestions. A few suggestions for NASCAR, the community members. First being, we all need to take track of both sides. We need to understand both sides and really put each other in those shoes. We need to educate ourselves too, not only as the community members, but as NASCAR fans about what they're going through, what this means for the community. Just education in general is number 1. Number 2 is that we all need to relax, refocus, and regroup. And I say this, I don't mean to be like a counselor and be like, hey guys, refocus, but I think we need to look at the other opportunities in NASCAR and focus more on those instead of really drilling home on a community that doesn't want this to happen. So the exciting opportunities coming up in NASCAR with schedule changes, we're talking things outside of the United States that NASCAR brought up very recently, kind of sneakily. They're talking Mexico City maybe. We're also talking adding a street course. So there's a lot of opportunities for NASCAR to look at instead of kind of hounding in on this community. There's also schedule changes, like we need more short tracks in the schedule. And we're going to talk about North Wilkesboro now because that's a track I actually think we need to have back in the sport. So North Wilkesboro, why are we talking about this? Well, the track that was opened in 1947 and closed in 1996, really people want to bring it back to life. Early last week, the Wilkes Chamber of Commerce called the Speedway Motorsports Incorporated saying, quote, "We want you back. We want to bring the track back." It's very exciting stuff. On the Dale Jr. Download a few weeks back, they had the Speedway Motorsports Incorporated president and CEO Marcus Smith on the show, and he said, quote, "We haven't forgotten about North Wilkesboro and that we are not giving up on it." So no promises from him. He said he's not making promises, but he wants to bring the Speedway back to a community that wants this track back. That is a big factor, a community that wants this track back. Now, of course, when the president of Speedway Motorsports Incorporated says, "We're working on bringing the track back, we haven't forgotten about you," the movement grows and it reaches people like Marcus Lemonis. So we've talked about Marcus Lemonis in the past, how he does amazing things with the Camping World Truck Series, how he sponsors drivers, how he's bringing in more revenue to the sport. Well, he said that he wants to donate $1 million to the cause of getting this track back on the circuit. He wants to donate it to renovate the track. He wants to help advertise. And with a big name like Marcus Lemonis donating his time and his money to the North Wilkesboro movement, I hope it happens. I think it's going to happen. So this is an opinion podcast, as you know, and as I've said. So here's my thoughts. NASCAR. Absolutely, yes, focus on bringing this track back, and here is why. This is also a short track like the Fairgrounds Speedway, and we need more short tracks in the NASCAR circuit. Also, the fans and the community, big part of the community, is on board for this. There's backing. This is going to cost a lot, obviously. It's more run down than Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway, but it's going to bring money back to the town. It's going to bring in tourism revenue. This is going to also expand the NASCAR roots. There's great history here with Red Byron, a pioneer in the sport, one of the first stars in the sport, bringing success to this track, and then one of the big stars now, Jeff Gordon, or as the poster shows here, won the last race at this track. So it has great history, great revenue, a great area. I say it is time to bring this track back. As a fan, I can't quantitate the costs that this is going to have for the sport, the revenue, the money, but I think it's totally worth it to focus on this track rather than upset a community at the Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway. Okay, I'm done. I'm done with the updates for now. There's a lot of controversy, a lot that goes on with that, a lot of opinions. So we're gonna end that discussion for now. I'll update you all as news comes out about those things and new tracks and new updates. But for now, let's get into the main event, the Drydene 400 at Dover International Speedway, a pre-race show. So let's get into it with some track facts. Dover International Speedway is a 1-mile track. The race is 400 miles long and 400 laps long. Stage 1 and Stage 2 are 120 laps each, and the final stage is 160 laps. Now let's line up the field. Last weekend's winner, Martin Truex Jr., is on the pole with points leader and teammate Denny Hamlin right beside him. Byron, Larson, and Harvick make up the top 5, then Kyle Busch, Ryan Blaney, Chase Elliott, Joey Logano, and Chris Buescher round out the top 10. Even with Brad's disappointing race weekend, he's starting back in 15th, which isn't too bad. I want to mention his crew chief will be out again this weekend, but for the same reasons that we don't know. So Grant Hutchins will again fill in for Jeremy Bolins. I want to mention too, Alex Bowman starting far away from his top 10 teammates in 16th. He just has to have better luck. He's just had such bad luck this year. The universe is not a fan of Alex Bowman right now, and some other drivers as well. Finally, I want to mention Matt DiBenedetto, who started last weekend's race inside the top 10. After an iffy day last week, he will now be starting the race in 18th, which just goes to prove if you've had a great season and slip a bit in one race, the NASCAR lineup metric won't cost you too much. But if you've had somewhat of a rough season, even if you picked up the pace, one bad day can set you back quite a bit. And all this talk leads me to lining up our odds, so let's see where these drivers place so I can get a good feel of who to have as my race winning pick. The last driver to win at this track was Denny Hamlin and then Kevin Harvick. The active driver with the most wins at this track is a 4-way tie with 3 wins each between Martin Truex Jr., Kevin Harvick, Kyle Busch, and Ryan Newman. The active driver with the best average finish at the track is Kyle Larson with a 7.42 average, and then since 2018, Harvick has had the best average finish with a 3.33. Behind him is Truex, and then Larson is right behind Truex. The team with the most wins at this track is Hendrick Motorsports with 20. The next closest is Penske with 18. And finally, the manufacturer with the most wins, what I counted, is Chevrolet with 41. Then we have Ford with 29 and Toyota with 7. So those are your lining up the odds. That's your lineup. So let's go into my race pick. Now, this seems like an obvious choice. I feel like it's almost a crime to go against Kyle Larson here with the success he's had these past few weekends and his stats recently at Dover. Let's go into some other choices, though. Now, again, Harvick has success at this track, but he has not had a race-winning car this season, and he hasn't showed that he can actually win a race. Then we have Denny Hamlin, who has shown he has a race-winning car, has not won a race. Then we have Kyle Busch, who's won a race, has a race-winning car, but doesn't have consistency. And so I honestly feel weird saying this, but Kyle Busch has been sort of a wild card this year, and usually that's not what you say about Kyle Busch, but this year alone, I don't know what he's going to do. He has a lot of new on his team, a new crew chief, and we don't know. He has a win to his name, though, so that's a positive for Kyle Busch. So I have some clarity in this argument here, so let me mention some of the clarity pieces first, then my driver. So bear with me as I explain this. Toyota has won 5 out of the last 10 races here, and overall at Dover they've won 7 races, with all those races minus 2 coming from 2 drivers in the Toyota camp or Joe Gibbs Racing. Those wins come from Kyle Busch, and they come from Martin Truex Jr. So here's why I feel good about Martin Truex Jr. He is able to have a race-winning car and close out a race. He has patience, and that's something that I haven't seen a lot of so far this season. He's won 3 races. That is hard to beat. So I'm going to go against the crowd of people who are going to choose Kyle Larson, and I'm going to choose Martin Truex Jr. to win the Drydene 400 at Dover International Speedway. Now, as always on Above the Line, I am not confident, so I always choose the second race winning pick or a garage pick, as I'm going to start calling it. And now I'm going to go with the crowd. I'm going to choose Kyle Larson as my garage pick for this weekend at the Drydene 400. I think if none of them win, at least they're going to do well. But I have a good feeling about Martin Truex Jr. making it 2 weekends in a row that he wins a race. So now my question is to you. Do you go with the crowd? Do you choose Kyle Larson as your race-winning pick? Let me know in the comments below. And with that, thank you all so much for listening to Above the Yellow Line, the show where we talk about all the updates, theories, news, recaps, and more of the NASCAR Cup Series. Make sure you tune in this weekend, Sunday on FS1 at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to watch the Drydene 400 at Dover International Speedway. And if you can't catch the race, make sure you follow me on Twitter by lap coverage on Cup Series race weekends. Also, follow me on Twitter just to see daily updates in the NASCAR community. Also, make sure you check out the Podium Finish. It is a great outlet I love writing for. They do race recaps, pre-race covers, they do driver interviews. It is so fun, so make sure you check them out and support them. But thank you all for supporting me and my channel, and until next time, I'll see you.